Welcome back to another video for Scary Biscuit Studios, and today we're going to be kind of covering off how to make some concrete pilings for your tabletop, around specifically around like kind of shore defenses and things like that. These kind of defenses are quite often used to stop boats from entering channels or pushing them into towards a certain thing. Like at Mobile Bay, there's a big long line of these that stretch from Fort Gaines to Fort Morgan. Uh, and there's a tiny little gap at the end between them, or towards the Fort Morgan end, which which is where they seeded with mines, but left a little channel open right next to the fort. So in order to get around these pilings, a wooden boat would have to go through the little opening gap, or try to remove these, which I couldn't do under the punishing guns of a fort. So the theory was that they could push the ships closer and closer towards Fort Morgan and cause significant amounts of damage, or push them into the torpedo field, which also happened on the day. So these played a really important part in Mobile Bay, but they're also very frequent in other areas and on other battlefields, such as the James River, or sometimes around the Mississippi, but not so often in the western rivers, because the tides and the river levels sometimes made these quite not particularly as useful as they could be in other spots. So we're going to make a few of these. These are built out of 3D printing bases, the supports. So I always keep these on hand for all sorts of projects. This is the second time I've used them for a project. The first time I did, I used them for trees and making forests out of and things like that for to put on the side of a riverbank, and that worked out really well. But for this time, I thought, you know what, this is good. We'll turn them into like these concrete pilings that were kind of sunk into the the channel bed to stop the ships. So I painted. So the colors for this one is obviously kind of a deep sea kind of color. I realized that in order to drive these down, the seabed is probably going to be a little bit. It's not going to be super deep at 1/600 scale, and so these would probably be a little bit greener in real life. But I chose this kind of color scheme to blend in with the table mat that I actually have for my wargaming, which is quite kind of deep blue for open sea sort of battles. So acknowledging the fact that these probably aren't the exact right colors for coastal work, I made the conscious choice to paint them up specifically to blend in with my table, rather than aim for historical accuracy. So with that said, let's dig into it. So the first thing that I did is I had to gather some supports, and what I was using at the time when I was kind of thinking about this project was I was making this rat line. So these rat lines I used before when I was working in my on my gunboats. In the previous video, you might have seen in the on the sides, I had some rat lines, and so that's why I was printing these off. I thought actually after I've got the actual rat lines off of there, they actually looked they were perfect size for a little piece of terrain. So these are the ones that I was talking about earlier. So you can see them on the side there. So I cut off a bunch of them. I'll just do that really quickly for you now. For the supplies, I kind of use these surgical scissors for when I'm working on something like super fine like this. So I'll kind of really very carefully come in here, kind of pre-cut a few of them so it's a little bit easier for us to kind of get through. One last little one there. Boing. Okay, got to save that part. That's the important bit. I'll put that on a frigate later. Okay, so now that leaves us with just this little support, these little supports here. And I'll use some clippers just to take little angled bits off there. Shoot these across the room. Oop, they're going all over the place. I can hear them bouncing off the windows. That'll be fun to vacuum later. And that big one. Okay. Then I'll shave these down a little bit so they're about just barely sticking out of the top of the water. A tiny little bit. There we go. Cool. That's the collection. That's all the prep work you need to do. So we got rid of all the taller bits, and now we've got our stumps. There are the bits of log that are going to poke out of the water. So as I said earlier, I went for a kind of a deep sea kind of color scheme. So that's what we're going to do again here today. just because that's going to match my table a little bit better. The base coat that I use is this dark Prussian blue. It's really, really good for that really deep base coat that you need. So that's a really good one. Vallejo colors. My next color, the medium tone, is one of my favorites. I really quite like this dark blue gray color. I use this for just about any sort of sea kind of color. If I need to have any sort of modeling or anything like that, I'll use this for water. It's one of my favorites because it's kind of got a little bit of green, a little bit of gray. It's a great mid-tone. For the highlights, I'm going to use this medium sea gray, another well-loved color. Again, Vallejo. That'll sit on top of the dark blue gray, and at the very top where there's a little bit of foam or something like that, I've got my cold white. So that's my color palette. Let's dig in. Radio. First of all, here's some paint I prepared earlier. You can if you want to, you can base coat this. Might make it a little bit easier, but in this case, I'm just going to go straight onto it with some color. I've got this little handle here that I'm going to use. I got a little bit of blue tack. I'll just put this tiny little blue tack here and here. These are quite fragile, the bases, so be a little bit careful that you don't snap them. So I just kind of very lightly push it on here, like that, and now you've got this great little handle that you can hold onto. You're not going to get your hands covered in blue paint, which I did the other day. It looked a little bit silly. So I just put a quick coat of blue over the top of it. It's going to go on a little bit watery. That's fine. Doesn't have to be. It can be actually the watery stuff can be quite an advantage because then you can do a bit of wet blending if that's your thing. You may have another way of doing water or different color schemes or something like that. If you got a cool color scheme, share it below, and we'll get so that other people can kind of have a look at what colors you're using. So that was super quick. Cool. So let that just sit for a second. I'll get my next tone. Oh, I've already got that out as well. Yeah, I'm way ahead of myself here. Excellent. Like I said earlier, you can take a little bit of this. You can just start kind of wet blending a little bit. See how it kind of goes in. It's kind of cool. You can start kind of going in and blending the kind of that medium tone a little bit with that darker Prussian blue. So then we've got kind of a build-up happening, which is great. And I just try to get truer and truer colors. Starting to consolidate them around where the pillars are. Cool. All right. And then a little bit of sea gray. I did not prepare this one. That's okay. I don't need a lot of that. All right. I'll try to make sure that these stay really close to the actual posts. Starting to build up a little bit of churned up water kind of feel around these. Cool. And there's a little bit of white, just a very little bit of white. You don't want a ton of white because if you get too much, then it's going to start looking like it's the sea is absolutely going bonkers, and the ship is going to be capsizing. So yeah, all right. So a little bit of blue or a little bit of white, but again, just very limited around, right around where there's these posts. Wash out your brush so you don't get as much blue in this one. Yeah, previously, I didn't really mind washing out my brushes because it kind of built up the colors, but for this one in particular, it kind of matters to get a bit more of that white, true white around some of this stuff. Cool. Oops. Focus. All right, cool. With that, I'm going to let that dry for a couple minutes. And while we do that, I'll put this on pause. be back in a second. All right, we're back. I think this is dry enough for that we can probably move on to the next step. So I've just had a little bit of white around the posts a little bit more after it kind of dried up a little bit, just to kind of accent a little bit more of the kind of foamy bits. But for now, that's enough on the water. We'll move on from there. So we'll move into the logs next. So for logs, I've got kind of a three tone to that as well. I've got my base coat is kind of like a chocolate brown, which is really an easy brown to use. I'll highlight that with all U.S. field drab. It's kind of a yellowish brown, which is really good. And then at the very top, so I'll put in a little bit of this Iraqi sand to kind of highlight the like a freshly smashed bit of wood or like a splinter of exposed splinters. Those are the three colors we'll use for the logs. So as I'm getting these out, I'll put a little bit on here. Stuff to work with. There we are. Nice chocolate brown. So this is going to be quite a dark brown. And what I'll do with that is I won't go all the way down to the bottom. I'll kind of let some of the foamy bits kind of ride up a little bit on the log. That one still had a bit of wet paint on it, so we'll come back to that one later. There we go. So I usually try to do one side first, and then I'll just kind of flip it over. Do the next side, and on. So all of them have a nice brown coat on them. And you could, for all intents and purposes, leave it at that if you didn't want to go into the next couple of layers of highlights. I like to do a little bit extra. Plus a dark brown at the very base. You do kind of a lighter brown towards the top. The dark brown gives you the appearance that the water is kind of like getting waterlogged, so to speak, in the on the piling a little bit. So then it looks like it's damp. Right. And so there's other ways of kind of representing pilings in games. One of the other ways that they used to do it is they used to just sink a wreck or sink an old hulk in an area, and then that kind of with all of its masts and sticky out bits, pretty much just play the same role, trying to puncture a passing by ship from below. So you could do like wrecks, or you could do another thing that they would do is they would tie chains between two posts and try to foul motors or scrape the bottoms and things like that. So there's quite a few different ways that you can represent this. All right, so my next tone is mid. My mid-tone is this U.S. field drab, so I'll put a bit of that on there. And get going here. And again, almost using the wet as kind of a guide, a little wet blending. You just go to the tops again, but again, not down to the bottom. Try to be each color, each post a bit of a mid-tone. There we go. Flick it around, keep doing it. You can see there's still a big chunk in the center above the blue that's still a bit wet. It's raining cats and dogs outside right now, so it'll probably take this piece a while to dry all the way through. Nearly there, just a couple more to go. Cool, all right. And that's the midtones all sorted. Oops, off the screen, sorry. All right, so you can kind of see you got some midtones happening, which is great. Now let's put a little bit of tap, or a little bit of tap a bit of this on top. So this is again optional. This having kind of freshly cut wood kind of color on top is not particularly common for stuff that's been kind of sitting in the water for some time. But I thought it was a nice little contrast and kind of brought out a nice different color that was necessary for kind of distinguishing it, I guess, from the other colors on there. So I use this Iraqi sand, which is a kind of a yellow brown. are very, very kind of yellow, light brown. And I just put a tiny little dab on top of each of these. Just the tiniest dab. Using the side of my brush. And just as if I can, just the very, very top. Cool. That's it. That's everything. I'll let that dry. Then I'll be able to what I might do at this point is take it and put some varnish over it, some gloss varnish, to keep the water nice and kind of shiny. And then I can take it off of this after that. Be sure to take it before, varnish it before you take it off of here, because otherwise when you go to spray it or anything like that, it might blow away because it's a pretty light piece of terrain. But yeah, that's it. So I'll do about 15 or 16 of those. They're about a little under 2 inches each, and so you can kind of line them up and create a nice big line of obstacles for your ships to have to navigate through. All right, and if you leave any questions, comments in the comments below, and then I'll jump in there and try to do my best to reply. And yeah, enjoy, and we'll see you next time.